house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hey everybody, it's Ian. It's time for another episode of Native Film Talk, and today we're going to talk about Grey's Anatomy. Yeah, no shit, Grey's Anatomy. I'm a big Grey's Anatomy fan. Me and my wife love the show. Fun fact, Shonda Rhimes, the showrunner, creator of Grey's Anatomy, aka creator of really Shonda Land, of How to Get Away with Murder and The Goat Scandal, Grey's Anatomy. Shonda Rhimes is a Dartmouth alum. Me and my wife are Dartmouth alums. So Dartmouth alumni, all in general, we are hardcore fans for Shonda. So Grey's Anatomy, when this show is just like, it's awesome because Meredith Grey, her backstory, she's the center of the show, but her backstory is how Shonda wrote Dartmouth into the show was she attended her undergrad. Before med school, Meredith Grey went to Dartmouth, so you'll occasionally see her wear like a Dartmouth long sleeve shirt or a Dartmouth t-shirt, Dartmouth sweater, and it's always a good sight for us. But that Dartmouth news aside, this episode came along. I heard about it when Robert Mesa was on the show. Robert Mesa is a new intern. He plays James Chee, Navajo person. When that news broke, that was a big deal, that he was going to be the first Navajo intern, the first Native American intern on Grey's Anatomy. And so I was kind of waiting for my right time to bring this up. I was kind of like thinking, how am I going to shoehorn an episode onto this one? And then in season 15, episode 17, the episode Tradition came out, and let's just get that out of the way. Of course, the one episode with natives in it is going to be called Tradition. So I had this episode squared away, done, wrapped up, the notes were all made, I was ready to do it, and then Res Dogs came, and frankly, this felt like table scrap. So if you're a Grey's Anatomy fan like me, I hope you can put aside your fandom, because I'm kind of gonna rip this episode apart a bit, because it's a nice try, but after watching Rutherford Falls, after watching Reservation Dogs, and you see this kind of representation on television, and you're just like, bro, come on, like, this is the best that we can do, really. And that's not to say it's like wildly awful. It's just not what we've come to expect, which is good. I think that's a positive thing I'll talk about at the end of the episode. But let's just jump into it. Let's talk about, we all know how this goes at this point. I'm going to introduce kind of the quick high points of the episode, cast review, plot review, positives, negatives, and then, final thoughts to take us home. But I think, I wanted to test out a new format, and I think I mulled that over. The new format is really just going to blaze over everything. It doesn't have to do with the plot, that it doesn't have natives in it. And this episode has a lot of native representation in it, unfortunately. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, let's jump into it. So season 15, episode 17, Tradition. Yikes. But then this is directed by Kevin McKidd. If you don't know, for those of you that don't know, Kevin McKidd plays Owen Hunt, Dr. Owen Hunt, and he directed this episode. And so, in television, a different person directs the episode, pretty much every episode. So I'm sure, I don't know how many other cast members have had their chance at directing. I'm sure a ton of them have. I don't know. I know Kevin McKidd has done a handful of these, so this wasn't his first time directing an episode. And this episode was written by Shonda Rhimes, Jess Righthand, and Felicia Pride. None of them are native. So my assumption is, going into this, that the native input was done, I think, just by asking people that they consulted on the show, maybe the actors. And I'll go over the cast review, but Amelia Rico, Tocola Black Elk, woo, Tocola, it's good to see him. Wes Studi, yeah, believe it or not, Wes Studi is in this, and then Robert Mesa is in this. My assumption is they had cultural advisors. I didn't see any in the cast, in the credits, rather, at the end of the episode, but my assumption is they probably garnered some of their feedback and incorporated it into the episode as much as possible. Who knows how much they actually incorporated their feedback, but they probably just consulted them. But let's go over the episode recap. This is what's on IMDb. Jackson shares big news with his colleagues while Karasik and Levi fight to save a pregnant woman's grandfather as she goes into labor. Maggie keeps a watchful eye on Meredith as Bailey and Richard put off telling her about DeLuca. So if you have no idea what's going on with Grey's Anatomy at this point, it's fine. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and every single Grey's Anatomy episode pretty much has this like major catastrophic event that's a medical event that they're trying to deal with while everyone's lives is like going on. And so they just try to weave those things. Sometimes they're weaved beautifully together. Other times it's kind of like, what was that about? This kind of feels like that because Jackson, for those of you that don't know, Jackson Avery of the Avery Foundation, his mom is like a hardcore G. She is like running shit. She's like a multi-millionaire slash almost touching billionaire, runs this massive foundation. So Jackson's going to take off to go to Boston to like run the foundation basically. And he's like saying his goodbyes throughout this episode. Karasik is just this like, if you know, you know, basically. But throughout this, Karasik is kind of a dick throughout the entire, like, that's his character. He's a dick. And, like, he's just a super, super smart neurosurgeon. He is one of the best and most brightest in his field. And that's what affords him the opportunity, affords him the ability to, the latitude, rather, to be such a dick. Because he's like, you know what? He might be an asshole, but he's the best in his field, so we have to put up with it. So that's kind of his character arc. And it's weird because in this episode, he puts that aside once he learns more about the native people in the show, or in the episode, and I'll talk about that. So let's jump into the cast review, and then we'll get going. Amelia Rico, so she's the main one. She is indigenous. She's unknown. I don't know what nation she is. On her IMDb, she is categorized as multi-hyphenate, indigenous Latina from San Antonio, so as far as I know. But she does play somebody who is Suquamish. She's Mary Ann in this episode. She's the one that's pregnant, and her grandfather is Wes Studi in this episode. But she is like near term, and she ends up going into labor during the episode. She plays Mary Ann in this one. She's also in Yellowstone for an episode. In her filmography, she was had a role in Walker. If you don't know, Walker is the like Walker Texas Ranger reboot. The guy from Supernatural, Jared Padalecki, is like the lead in that one. Other than that, she has like small roles here and there, but I don't think she's played very many native roles from what I could see, outside of like Yellowstone, where she like was a native person. But I think this is her second one. And then Takola Black Elk, young warrior, it's so good to see you. Takola, I haven't seen him in ages. I love Takola Black Elk. I don't know why. He's just like one of those guys that I just root for. He was Sam Littlefeather in Wind River. If you remember my episode there, I kind of talked about him. I was like, I haven't seen him since Skins. And when he got jumped by Eric Schwig with the baseball bat in the hospital. When he was like talking to Eric Schwig, and he was just like, Ghosts, Onuji. I have no idea why that line sticks in my head, but for some reason, every time I see Takola, that's what I think of. And it's really good to see him. And he's apparently also in Yellowstone at one point. Plays Sam Stands Alone. Like everybody, all these natives are in Yellowstone apparently. I need to watch this show. I need to get around to watching Yellowstone. I'll just maybe pony up the dough for a few months and watch download Paramount Plus, so I can dislike it. Just kidding. I'm pretty biased, but I think it's probably going to be like Longmire, where it's like, it's good, but it's still clearly a white dude writing about natives. My opinion. Those of you that are Yellowstone lovers, tell me if I'm wrong, but that's what I think it's going to be like. And then freaking Wes Studi. Wes Studi is in this, and that was such a surprise. This episode opens up with him in a gurney. But Wes Studi, who plays William Lawrence, 68-year-old Squamish and Duwamish man, presents with aphasia and right-sided paralysis. That's kind of how they introduce him, coming off the gurney. But he's the GOAT. If you already know, no intro needed for this man. Great to see him. I was frankly super surprised. I only knew about Robert Mesa and Amelia Rico being in this episode because of the trailer leading up to this one. So Wes Studi being in this was a huge surprise. He plays a man called William Lawrence. And then Robert Mesa. So Robert Mesa, he is Navajo. He's an intern who almost quit after his first day because of Karasik, and he was being such a douche to him. But, he started in the show at the beginning of the pandemic. And the pandemic in Grey's Anatomy, rather. Like, that's the other thing, too, with Grey's Anatomy. If you're unfamiliar with the show, they are very lockstep with what's happening in current affairs, whether it's politics or social justice issues. Black Lives Matter. When the protests were happening, they created a few episodes around that. When it comes to like colorism, racism, sexism, really in kind of major milestones that have to do with trying to highlight the plight of underrepresented communities. Like Grey's Anatomy is really good at doing that, and so I think that was just a spin. I mean, I think the intent of this episode was well placed. I mean, it's not like they came out and wanted to maliciously misrepresent natives or over romanticize natives, even though at times they do that. This came from a good place, in my opinion, because the lens on this is COVID-19 and its effects on Native people. And I think the focus of this episode, was to highlight how COVID-19 disproportionately affected people of color, one, but more so people in Native communities. And I think that weaving in these Native characters allowed them the opportunity to highlight some of the stuff that Native people are facing across Indian country, not just in the Seattle area where the show takes place. So Robert Mesa, though, some of the stuff that they do say in here is just like, ugh. So he's Diné, he's Navajo, and he supposedly comes from a family of healers. His words, healers. He says healers to like white people, like not even just saying it to like his other Native friends. He says healers himself. But anyway, but Robert Mesa, his other roles, he was in Men Who Build America, the miniseries. He was in the Dusk Till Dawn miniseries, and so he's had stuff like that, small roles. This is like clearly his biggest role he's had, or biggest opportunity rather. But, we're 10 minutes into this episode now. Let's just jump right into the plot. 11 minutes now, actually. So this episode opens in COVID times. Like I said, Jackson Avery's last day. Throughout this entire episode, he's like just saying his goodbyes. And this is a big deal. Jackson Avery, if you don't know, he's a long running character in this show. So throughout this show, he's like reminiscing, kind of like looking back on good times, bad times, and kind of like hitting some high points with some of the main characters, and having some conversations that they should have had earlier, blah, 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 having final conversations. But also Meredith Grey has had COVID-19 throughout this series, or throughout this season, or the past couple of episodes. And she's been battling that, and so the whole culmination of this episode is her finally being able to go home. And so as this story is going on, as we touch on the Native characters in this episode, we're weaving through those two people's storylines for the most part, Meredith's and Jackson Avery's. But the episode opens up, the main part with the natives is it opens up with the ambulance pulling up to the ER. And so what's funny is I have a friend who's a paramedic. Well, my best friend who's a paramedic. And he loves to point out that he's like, never in my life as being a paramedic has a surgeon or a doctor ever come out to meet the ambulance outside of the hospital. He's like, no matter how bad it is, we have to bring it in to them and basically set it up in front of them. And even then, we're waiting for the doctor to come. He's like, it's kind of like, it's definitely made for TV, but I thought that was an interesting thing. But Wes Studi comes out, the doctors come out, and James Chee and Karasik come out, and James Chee is the focus of this episode, and he does give the spiel of when Wes Studi comes out. William Lawrence, 68-year-old Suquamish and Duwamish man, presents with aphasia and right-sided paralysis. So we just learned that William Lawrence, Wes Studi, he got something happen, basically. But he knows him, actually. James Chee, he's the focus of this episode because he exits an ambulance where he was treating William Lawrence. So the episode opens, you're like, what the hell is an intern coming out of the ambulance for? Because he was treating Wes Studi with a stroke. And we learned that Wes Studi is playing a Suquamish man, and James Chee volunteers at an urban Indian clinic on his time off when he's not working at the hospital there. And he states that the patient, Wes Studi, had COVID recently when he was treating him at that urban clinic. That's how he knew him, and he kind of like rode along with the ambulance. And which is frankly, I really like that they included this part. There were some people during COVID, like Native doctors throughout the nation, that were just exhausted, that were working close to Indian country because they were working to really they were working one job, which was at the hospital, but because it was affecting their people, like they were working themselves ragged, doing as much as they could, whether it was delivering resources, running drives for vaccinations, running drives to get people COVID tested. Like these people were run ragged. So I like that they included like James Chee's character, who's like going through he's an intern at this hospital, this prestigious hospital that is going through COVID, where they're already run ragged. But on his free time, which is probably very few, and he should be sleeping probably during that free time, instead he's volunteering at this like urban native clinic, this like IHS. I don't know. It's interesting that they didn't call it IHS, but he's been volunteering at this like IHS hospital facility during his off time. And frankly, it's close to accurate, but this dude must be fucking exhausted. Like, I like that they did that because like Dr. Michelle Tom in Winslow is a perfect example of this, and I'm not sure if she was inspiration for this storyline, but that's someone who is highlighted across Indian country as someone who is like worked in Winslow, Arizona, which is a border town of the Navajo Nation, and just showed how you can see like she was working herself to exhaustion, and she like just killed it. She did such a great job supporting the efforts of COVID with like it being close to the Navajo Nation. So I was curious if maybe that like her real life story was kind of weaved into that inclusion of James Chee working at an Indian clinic while still basically having two jobs. And then William Lawrence, Wes Studi's character, he's the grandpa to Amelia Rico's character, Marianne. And so after they take Wes Studi into the hospital, I'm just going to call him Wes Studi throughout this episode. Sorry. Wes Studi goes into the hospital, and now James Chee and Marianne are standing there waiting for an update from Karasik. And this is where they really lay on the history lesson. They really lay on the, like, we Googled Wikipedia. That's what this dialogue feels like. But she's standing there. Karasik comes up. And Karasik is... Wes Studi is being wheeled into the hospital. And Amelia Rico comes out of nowhere, Marianne, and she's like, he's my grandfather. Please help him. He's an elder. And she doesn't stop there. She says, he's my grandfather. Please help him. He's an elder, a language keeper. Just an opportunity to weave that in there. And Karasik's just like, that doesn't change the plan. We're still going to give him the care. Just go wait in the COVID waiting area for updates. And that should have been it. And also, so this is where, before I advance this part any further, this is where the difference between a non-native show and a native show. We have to know that Marianne is native. We have to. And because it's COVID, it's a little difficult. But we have to know, the audience has to know that she's native. She's wearing what appears to be, it's like screen printed, but it looks like a woven basket is like the design on her mask. And I'm like, bro, just put a regular face mask on her. Jesus, like, yes, natives do wear native design masks. And not saying that everybody doesn't or the majority don't, but a lot of us are just walking around in regular masks. Like, we just have regular blue masks that we get from, like, I don't know, the grocery store. When we walk into the store, they're like, oh, I forgot my mask in my car, and we take that one. Like, we don't have these, like, fancy designed, like, freaking face masks all the time, and I don't know why. To me, that was the equivalent of, like, a Pendleton jacket, a beaded brim hat, or, like, a long hair on a man. And we do get that with the Cola Black Elk, but... I feel like the only reason Wes Studi doesn't have long hair is because people know it's Wes Studi. If he was a lesser known male actor, I feel like they would have made him have long hair, just like Tacola. My opinion. Robert Mesa, same thing. But anyway, it should be noted, Marianne, she's very pregnant. She's near term. She does go into labor after this dialogue. But, what's funny is, Grace does this. They overshare to the audience, so you bond to the character to be emotionally tied. It's not out of sorts for them to do this, but it's just like when it's a native person and it's like native representation for me, since I'm like really aware of that stuff, it like really feels out of place. Because like an example would be, like someone's dad will be like in a car accident and his wife will be standing next to the gurney as it rolls into surgery. They stop at the double doors. Usually a resident isn't scrubbing in, or an intern will be standing with them, and they'll be like, ma'am, you can't go any further. I'm sorry, this is as far as we can go. And she'll like talk out loud, to reveal what their backstory is. It's like, I was just about to divorce him. He's beat me and cheated on me for the past 20 years. He's come over to sign the divorce papers when he got into an accident. I just want him out of my life, but not dead. Not dead, you know? What about my 4 kids and their my 3 grandkids? What are they going to think? Especially given that they all live in Florida. One is in Texas. The other one's deployed in Iraq. I'm not sure how all my girls are going to deal with their dad leaving them. Well, I'd better call my girlfriend, my boyfriend. My husband and I are getting a divorce. We've been separated for the past 5 years and lying to our kids about it. Gosh, I hope he makes it. Thank you for listening to me. Like that kind of crap. They just lay it on really thick. And that's what it's like with this native representation. And I will talk about their dialogue. So in there, I preface all of that really for people that don't watch Grey's Anatomy. But Marianne and Wes Studi's status, let's go back to that. So he has a stroke. They're going to try to clear this clot to see if conditions improve. So James Chee and Karasik are in... let me see. What am I trying to say right here? Oh, okay. So they're still outside in the tents talking. And it's like we're in the middle of COVID. There's no way, one, Karasik would never go all the way outside of the hospital to the tents to give an update, but it's Grey's Anatomy. But Marianne and Jim Chee, they're talking to each other because they know each other, because they've volunteered at the same places. And they're talking about Wes Studi's character, and Karasik gives them an update, and Marianne interrupts him before he even gets to it. He's just like, he has teachings, stories that have been passed down for hundreds of years, and Tulsa, I can't remember how they say it, the ancestral language of our people in this land. I tried to learn them as much as I can, but it's a full-time job, and I already have one of those. We can't lose him. The indigenous communities have already lost so many elders to COVID. And then Jim interrupts him. We've been hit hard. The clinic's been packed and still doesn't have enough PPE. The government was supposed to send in a shipment, and Karasik interrupts them with a snide comment, if you know what happens, but he says, let me guess, all booties. And then Jim replies, body bags. And Karasik, for once, is baffled. He says, what? I'm sorry, that's so awful. And it's very clear he's affected by this, which is not like Karasik at all. And Marianne says tribes in other parts of the country with less access to healthcare and running water have it worse. But we believe we're all connected, like my Diné friend here. And Karasik says, Marianne, I'm going to look out for your grandfather. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure he can pass down his knowledge to the little junior in there, and points at her pregnant stomach. And then, of course, in Grey's Anatomy fashion, she goes into labor. But, that whole interaction, I wish I was making that up or I was embellishing. But really, she was just, like, that whole dialogue, I feel like they just Googled... They just went up to the computer and were like, Native Americans and COVID. And they were just like, good God. Shonda, come here, look at this. Can you believe that indigenous communities have been hit harder by COVID than any other demographic? And look at this. They have less access to healthcare and running water. People who don't have running water have it worse. Hey, good news. They believe they're all connected. Oh, we should write that into the script. It was just like, this is poverty porn. You know why? Because Karasik is never nice. Tom Karasik is the douchebag. He is the asshole. That is his role in the show, to be loathed by the main character, by the other characters. He is never nice to anybody. And he's never not snarky. Even when he's nice to people, the only person that he's nice to is Teddy Altman. And if you watch the show, that's because that's his love interest. And that's the only person he's really nice to and kind of like tries to show his good side. He never does it to strangers, And it's so weird. I was waiting for the Karasik jabs and jokes, but not this one. Hey, hands off. These are spiritual, sacred people. Sacred people, we can't make fun of them, I'm gonna do everything I can for your grandfather so he can pass down knowledge to little junior. I'm like, Karasik, that's not you. What is happening here? And Marianne says other tribes without running water and less healthcare have it worse. Then she looks at James Chee and says, we believe we're all connected, like my Diné friend here. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. This is cool, but not cool. It's cool because, like, Diné is said on Grey's Anatomy. But my Diné friend, that's in Indian country, that's what we would call a tryhard. Because I don't, like, Navajo, Diné, I would never say I'm Diné to a non... This is a spectrum. Some people say Navajo, some people say Diné. I don't introduce myself as Diné to people who aren't Navajo. I don't even say Diné really all the time. But it's like, it's the first time they reveal that he's native, and no one second guesses her or says, "What's Diné?" Everyone's just like, "Oh, that's cool." It feels so, when people say Diné, honestly, like, unless it's like, depending on the setting, it feels performative. Like, certain settings, when people say Diné, it makes sense, and I get it. Like, and it's like, okay, it doesn't feel out of place. But you're standing outside of a hospital, and you're Suquamish. You're not even Navajo, and you're talking to everybody that isn't native around you, and you're like telling a non-native person, like, "Oh, it's my Diné friend here." Just like, what? This is my Navajo bro. This is my native. I would say that, oh yeah, he's native. This is Jim, he's native. This is James Chee, he's native. I don't know. It's just like, there are some people who are like, really want to be referred to as Diné all the time, and that's their prerogative. It just felt weird to me. Like, as a native person, as a Navajo person watching this, to have a person who is not Navajo, Suquamish, be like, "Oh, this is my Diné friend over here." Like, what? Is he making you say that? Because I don't know. It's just weird. But I like that they also include like the language struggle, because in her dialogue, she does say like, "I'm trying to learn my language, but that's a full-time job, and I already have one of those." Like, so much in that sentence is like said. It's like, Native people are capable, but we need to cram it into this like book report. Like, and I think that's what sucks, is like, that I want to learn about that, like, what's James Cheese is like, what's his backstory? Is he res, non-res? Is he learning his language? Like, what does he do? Because we learn a little bit about Marianne, and I think that's what sucks, is like, this whole, it's so much crammed in such a quick interaction. Native people are capable, but we need to cram it into this fucking book report of a dialogue. And I wasn't monotone when reading that interaction. That's legit what it sounded like, unfortunately. The only way it could have been cornier is if they gave Karasik an Indian name and blessed him with some cedar they had conveniently in their pockets. Like, other than that, man, it's just like, ugh. So Marianne, of course, has serious contractions because it's, Grey's Anatomy, and she's 5 days earlier, and her OB that was supposed to deliver her isn't. So now Carina DeLuca's sister, that's how I always remember her, but she's an OB that works there, and so she's going to deliver the baby. And Carina, she's a main character in the show. So and so what's weird is like, she was introduced later, the DeLuca siblings, that came along, and Andrew at this point is dead, but Carina is still around, and she's working with Marianne, saying like, "I'm going to deliver the baby." And Marianne has to tell Carina, "Before I'm in too much pain, I can't, before I'm in too much pain and I can't remember my own name, I want to keep the placenta." And she wants to keep the placenta because, and she shifts her gaze into the other side of the room as to like stare off into the space. "We're taught to bury it on Suquamish land, so she always knows where her home is." And DeLuca just like looks at her and has this like softened look. That's beautiful. So that was gross to me, because she could have just said, "I want to keep the placenta." It's 2021. It's not weird to say, "I want to keep the placenta." People like grind them up and put them in capsules and eat them. People do all kinds of crazy stuff with placentas now, non-native alike, native and non-native alike. This like cultural sharing that this episode feels like, it's just like, what are you doing? So there's that piece of it. And this is accurate. Like, what she said is accurate. People bury their umbilical cords, placentas on their homeland, because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what we've done for time immemorial. It varies from tribe to tribe. Everyone has different things they do. Something, a lot of it is really like trying to just give back to the land that brought you, and basically like connect you to that homeland, and be thankful. But what's gross is, today, there's so much like romanticism in birthing when it comes to giving birth in non-native spaces. You go to birthing centers, home births, it's like a lot of like really weird, like crunchy, like super spiritualism, a lot of like this is my tribe, even though like none of us are native, like they call each other tribe. And you'll find these weird Instagram accounts and like birthing centers and like these small communities where it's all about like reconnecting to yourself. And this is a very spiritual experience, I'm not discrediting that, but there are people that are hungry to cling on to this kind of stuff. My fear is by sharing stuff like this, that people will do this thinking that that's what natives do. Like, oh, we're just going to bury the placenta because that's what the Suquamish people do. Like, I don't like that you're putting this stuff out there because it's like, this is real. There's a line. Some of this like pan-Indian stuff that you can share, it's whatever, you know. Talking about how powwow drums are like supposed to be the beat of the like heartbeat of the earth. It's like fine, you can take stuff like that, but the like it's oversharing when it gets to the point of like this is what we do with the placenta. This is what is the significance of birth is around us, or this is what smudging means, you know, or what it could mean. I don't know. And we do that. We smudge later on in this episode, and I don't like how a lot of that stuff is romanticized. This like cultural sharing goes too far, in my opinion, because with this one, there's an industry built around this spiritualism, holism, finding your spirit animal during birth, like all of that crap, you know. And this just feeds into that because Grey's Anatomy. This is Grey's Anatomy. It's not like this is Res Dogs or Rutherford Falls. This has a global reach. And you're putting this stuff out there. You're perpetuating stuff about Native people, but also you're feeding into this like misconception of who we are already in this industry that is not regulated. Like nobody really talks about that part of the industry in those practices. And I might get some hate mail from that, you know, and whatever, you know. But I can tell you, as a Native person, as a Native man, and having a Native wife, when we look through and try to find, you know, these services for ourselves, we get turned off by a lot of it because we're like, what the hell are these white people doing with these like birthing centers and at home centers? And I don't know, it's just gross. But anyway, what I don't want is for people to take this and be like, I heard from somewhere that natives bury their placenta on their homeland. Is that true? You know, you're gonna, because natives, we're the clearinghouse for this kind of stuff. We're their search engines. Where if you know one Native person, you get these questions. Hey, what do you think about what's going on in Dakota Access Pipeline? Hey, what do you think what's going on about, you know? It's like, ugh. Anyway, because we're all the same. We're all going to get those questions, right? And I just don't like that, you know? And so we flash back to West Duty. He's being worked on. Karasik is checking out his stroke while they're in the operating room. So it's Karasik and it's James Chee and, gosh, I always call him Glasses. Anyway. So they're all standing around, you know, West Duty. They're in the operating room, and they're standing over Wes as they're working on him. And they're trying to figure out what the cause of his stroke is. And this is where him and James Chee have like this one-on-one dialogue. And it's like, you met him at an urban clinic? And James Chee, yes, sir, I volunteer on my off time. Mostly primary care visits, but there's also an apothecary, so sometimes I'll make salves for burns and scars using local plant medicine. Other times we use traditional practices like prayer and song, and I do a lot of smudging. No shit, that's his exact words. And somebody in the back interacts. What's that? So this is the part that irks me. Not so much that somebody asks what's smudging, it's that Karasik does what so many non-natives do. There's a fucking Navajo in the room who just dropped some knowledge on you. A non-native asks him a question directed at him, and you need to butt in with your own knowledge about it. For what? Just to show that you know shit? You know, they unknowingly showed one of the realest native interactions you'll ever see by trying to be respectful. And I think that's what's interesting is Grey's Anatomy didn't know they gave one of the most truest interactions possible. But instead, so the question is asked when James says, other times we use traditional practices like prayer and song, and I do a lot of smudging. What's that? Karasik interrupts and he says, burning sage, right? Or tobacco? And James Chee in real life, he would like furrowed his brow and looked at him like, "What the fuck? Where did you learn that? Where did you read that? Who told you that? Or what movie did you see?" Instead, he just responds like, "Oh yeah, this random white dude knows about burning sage and burning tobacco." But he says here they use cedar, but I'm Navajo and we use tobacco. It's one thing a lot of us tribes have in common. So right there, why the Diné thing bothered me. James calls himself Navajo. He doesn't even call himself Diné. I think that's where it put me over the edge. If James was like, "Oh, I'm Diné," he's like, no, he calls himself Navajo. But outside the hospital, the non-Navajo person is like, "Oh, this is my Diné friend here." I don't know, man. It's just like that could be splitting hairs, but as a Navajo person, that irks me. And yeah, and so it's kind of like in the parallel would be in Reservation Dogs, the episode with why can't I remember the name? But the episode where Bear's mom hooks up with that white guy, the Indian lover, and instead of saying Lakota, he says my Lakota friend. And it's like that for me. I think it strikes that nerve for me. But yeah, this interaction in the surgery room and outside, Marianne, I felt like this interaction and the interaction with Marianne before, in the surgery room and Marianne talking to Carolina De Luca about her delivery. I felt like I was watching a kid's show, like this information was being read off of like a tribe's website or like a poorly written book report on native people. It's like, smudging? What's that? Oh, an ancient practice where hunter-gatherers would offer up plants or herbs of intrinsic value as an offering to their deity through application of fire. This was done customarily as means of maintaining harmony and balance within their worldview. Isn't that neat? Wow. Now let's learn about Chief Sokotoa. Ugh. It's just like throughout this episode, it's just like that's how I felt. I felt like I was just, what are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish? Because we know, or I know rather, Grey's Anatomy is probably never going to have another native episode at all. And this is all this show is ever going to show with native representation. And I'm most fascinated with native representation where it's unexpected. People can go out and watch Rutherford Falls. People can go out and watch Res Dogs. And that's the shit. That's like, yes, we are on the right track. But shows like this, where you don't expect to see natives at all, and this is what you get, freaking gross. And so throughout this, throughout this episode, we're jumping around to Jackson, to Meredith, trying to further their plot lines. But then we go back to after that procedure, in the surgery room when they were working on Wes. And of course, they have to split between these two. So Marianne is having a baby. She's going through labor. At the same time, Wes Studi is laying in a hospital bed. And of course, they play like some soft song, trying to progress the plot line. This is typical Grey's Anatomy fashion. They play these two scenes in tandem, and they're flipping between the two as Marianne is struggling and pushing through, and Wes Studi standing there. But he isn't just, or I'm sorry, James Chee is standing over Wes Studi's body as he's laying there. And he's alive. I don't know why I said body. Wes Studi's laying in a bed, and James Chee standing over him. And he isn't just standing there. He has a PAPR on, a positive air respirator. It's a loose-fitting mask, just COVID precautions. But he's burning tobacco and standing over Wes. He has it in like an abalone shell, it looks like. And he's doing, and so Karasik and Schmidt, who I call Glasses, that's his nickname in the show, but they're watching him through the double pane glass, and they're not saying anything. They're just like watching him in fascination. And he isn't hovering. When you smudge, you kind of like hold the shell over the body, and you kind of, are wafting the flame, wafting the smoke over where you need to, or off to the four directions. Whatever tribes do it different. People within these tribes do it different. They're all taught different ways. But he isn't just doing this. I swear, like, James Chee is trying to be like a fucking airbender or something. He's like standing off away from Wes Studi's body, and he's like pushing with his palms like he's doing some kind of like kata. I don't know what he's doing, but he's like pushing the smoke over his body. And of course, it's like in slow motion while this like music is playing in the background. And it's odd because, yeah, it's just like, what is happening? And like Karasik and Schmidt are just watching him like, oh, this is such a beautiful display of the Native American culture. And, and then flash to Marianne during this, I don't know what you want to call it, montage. Marianne has the baby. So she actually has the baby in the ham, and they're making it known that they're delivering the placenta, which they never do in movies. I've never seen, so until we had our first kid, it never occurred. It made sense because I've seen sheep and cows give birth my entire life, and the placenta comes out after the baby. But you never like equate that to actually happening to humans. And so not until we had our kid and we learned and went through all the classes that you learned about that. But they never show that in movies or in television. You birth the baby, then you birth the placenta. And when I'm thinking about it now, in my entire life of all of my movies I've ever seen, I've never seen them say, okay, now we're going to deliver the placenta. But because it has to do with the natives, and she specifically stared off into the corner of the room and said, I want to bury it in Suquamish land, so she always knows where she's from, blah, blah, blah. But this is the first time I've ever seen that. It's monumental in that regard, so we get more education about the birthing process through movies, or television rather, but I just was like, ugh. So this ends, and James Chee walks out of the room after smudging and airbending over West Studi, and James is like, Karasik asks him, he's like, hey, they teach you at the clinic? They teach you that at the clinic? And James says, no, I grew up with it. I was born into a family of healers. That's where, like, I just wanted to, like, throw my hands up in the air, like a coach that just got thrown out of a game. I just was like, what the hell are you saying? None of this is said in jest. None of this is said, like, hyperbole. Like, he's just like, no, I was born into a family of healers. If you have... Okay, so let's entertain this storyline. Let's say James comes from a line of medicine men, and people who, diagnose and treat people back on his homeland. I just... Calling healers? Really? Just say medicine men. Just say, I don't know, just don't even acknowledge it. Just say, I grew up with it. Instead, we have to know that James Chee, who is gracing this show, Grey's Anatomy, comes from a long line of Native American healers. He can't even say, oh, my grandpa was a doctor, and he kept up the cultural practice. Of course, he has to be the first doctor from his family. He can't be, he's a healer. And Karasik, of course. This is like the first time we ever see Karasik dialogue. He's like, oh, healers? Well, same here. Only change healer to failed Broadway singer and substitute math teacher. And I'm just like, yikes. But of course, like, West Studi wakes up because the smudging cured him. The healing worked. They definitely make it seem that way. That as soon as James is done smudging and they kind of have this quick interaction, West Studi finally wakes up. And, and then they tell Wes, like, hey, you're going to be okay. Marianne is in the other room having, your grandchild. Due to COVID, you're going to have to meet him through, video and not in person. And so they do that. And so West Studi is, like, meeting seeing Marianne and the baby through basically like a tablet. They're video calling each other. And it was cool because it's like West Studi does this a great elder monologue where he's just like, it feels like it feels performative, and it feels like hyperbole. And I don't know if Grey's Anatomy intended to do this, but his dialogue, like his words that he says, it's so elder-like. Like, it's cringe. But that's how elders are. Like, they're cringe. People that, like, you can see who West Studi is, not as a real person, but like his character, you can see who he is. Like, he's that grandpa or uncle that, like, stands up and talks for too long, or people are just like, oh, like, he just talks too much. But it's like, it was good. It was a good story. I really liked it. And so what was interesting, though, is so Tukola Black Elk shows up after the baby's born, and Tukola is Mary Ann's husband. And what's cool is when Wes is talking to Tukola and Mary Ann, the baby's in a traditional Suquamish cradle board. It looks like it anyway. Personally, I think that the baby was just born. I would not put a baby in a cradle board in the hospital right after birth, like fresh in this world, and you're just gonna lug that thing in. You're gonna bring the cradle board into the hospital. I don't know. It was just, that felt weird to me. You know, it's a newborn. I wouldn't put a baby into a cradle board for like a month. Maybe, yeah, like a month. I don't know. To each their own. If you've put your baby in a cradle board in the hospital, I apologize. Maybe I just don't know. But that just felt like Grey's Anatomy. Really, you like the baby is fresh from the womb, and they're gonna put it already in a cradle. But that would not happen. They'd still be skin to skin. You know. I don't know. It just once again, we have to know these people are Native American. To call a black elk, he can't just look like Robert Mesa. He's got to come in with his long, flowing Lakota hair, you know. But the rest of the show focuses on Meredith, you know, going home after being home from COVID. Jackson finished saying his goodbyes, and then it's over. So that's really the end of the plot. Positive. So I'll say the casting is excellent. While the actors themselves are not Suquamish or even from the Pacific Northwest, you know, nice to see some new talent. You know, Robert Mesa, it was really refreshing to see Tacola again. I really, for some reason, like, I just see that dude and I'm like, I know that dude. Even though I don't know him, like, I see a Tacola. Like, he just seems like a regular dude, and I really root for people like that. I loved him in Skins, you know. Happy to see he's in Yellowstone. I might even just go watch it just because he's in it, honestly. Amelia Rico, you know, I don't know a whole lot about her, but, you know, it's just good to see some fresh faces, some new people. It's also great to see Grace take some effort to represent some Native people from the area. So they didn't, like, make them all Lakota. They actually made an effort, tried to make it highlight some issues going on in Indian country, actually represent a community from the Pacific Northwest. So they tried, and I'll dive into that on the negatives. I think Amelia Rico is a good actor, though. You know, while her lines were super cringe at times, you know, she's just going what she was given her. Overall, I think she did great. I really enjoyed her acting. And Wes Studi was just naturally awesome to see. Any show that brings Wes Studi on, just fucking awesome. Robert Mesa, it's really good to see a recurring character in this show. So we're not going to get a whole Native representation episode again, my opinion, but we're still going to get some Robert Mesa here and there. You know, James Chee, we're still going to get a few Navajo, Native American things peppered in. So this isn't the last of Native representation in this show, but I'm positive it's not going to be like this again. So I like that Wes Studi didn't have long hair. They didn't try to give him extensions or anything like in fucking Hostels. But I don't know. It's just like Tacola still had long hair. You know, while we do have long hair, some of us, it's not all of us. It's just, I don't know. Is that a real gripe? I'm not sure. But so let's go to the real meat of this, the negatives. To me, this is what meeting the quota looks like. Unfortunately, this is what it feels like when you have like leftovers and you grab the first Tupperware container that's like on the dish rack, on the drying rack, because it's closest, and you don't want to go get the right one that's like stuffed away and you have to like find the container lid for it. So rather than sift through that pile and put the work in to get the right one, you just grab the closest container for the job. You eyeball it and go, yeah, I'll make this work. And you cram all the food you possibly can into this container, even though it's not the right one. That's what it felt like, honestly. It's like, Grey's Anatomy, you can do better than this. Shonda Rhimes, you can do better than this. You know, Shonda's my girl. While I don't know her, she is a Dartmouth alum. She's a 91, I'm a 10. My wife is a 10, you know, class 2010. You know, we ride or die for Shonda, just like everyone else. But it's like, come on, Shonda, you know? It's like she gave the Dartmouth commencement speech for 2014. Like, she's a big deal, and people love her. You know, I love her. You know, but this felt flat. This felt lazy. This felt like, let's make sure we give the Native characters their due. Let's make sure that we highlight what's going on for Native people across the United States. And the writing, it just felt like the inclusion of stuff. Like putting the cradle board in there, having the mask that like had that woven print on it. Like, there's just stuff in here. Like, it's not, I don't know. I love it. I still love Grey's Anatomy. I'll keep watching until the end. You know, the show took a dive after the plane crash, you know, really declined after Christina left, when Callie and Arizona left. Ugh. Like, this show continues to disappoint me. You know, Derek's death, You know, that was a big disappointment. Not because he died, but the way he died. Like, this show lets me down so much, but it's Grey's Anatomy. I just keep coming back. And I still love this show. It's just, and maybe that's the problem. And people can call me out for that. Maybe I propped this episode too much. Maybe I gave it too much hype leading up to it, because it's a show that I love, and I was expecting more, and I didn't get that. You know, and especially I think this show had the unfortunate but fortunate for natives time to come out when Res Dogs came out. It's like, how can you be excited watching this when you have Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls available? Go watch Res Dogs, go watch Rutherford Falls, and then watch this and tell me this is good. And that's exactly what happened. I watched this episode, I started my show notes, I got halfway through, and I watched Reservation Dogs, and I'm like, Grey's Anatomy is trash. No joke. I did this. I started this right when Reservation Dogs episodes, right when season 1 was launched, and I ended up doing my tangent mini series on all the episodes, because I'm just like, watching Res Dogs, I was like, how can I go back and go talk about Grey's Anatomy now after just seeing this awesome representation? And so that's exactly what happened, you know? I mean, the name of this episode is called Tradition, for crying out loud. If I said, okay, they're going to go very stereotypical here, and I just wrote down all the episode titles of all Grey's Anatomy shows, and I just put it on a Word document, and I said, okay, I'm going to give you one guess. No context. Read all of these titles. I want you to tell me which one is a native episode. It's all Tradition, probably. Might as well call it Stolen Women Captured Hearts, you know? Just kidding. That was a little too far. Sorry, Michael Grey Eyes, but it just, like, I don't know. That title was just too on the nose for me. But that's what Grey's does. Grey's is on the nose. They're like purposely put a hat on a hat sometimes. Like, I get it, but it's just like, when it comes to this is I'm very particular about this, obviously because this podcast exists. But, you know, final thoughts. This is what Table Scraps feels like. You know why? Because it's like, I feel like I'm obligated to like this, because this is one of my favorite shows. I feel like I'm stepping out of line because I shouldn't criticize Grey's Anatomy, because it's like, you should be happy. Grey's Anatomy, this is like one of the biggest shows of all time. And that's not even joking. This is on season 17, and it's probably going to keep going past 20. Like, this is one of the biggest shows of all time, and it has native representation about it. You know, I'm not happy about James Chee's background. Instead of healers, just say medicine men. I don't understand, or like, call it what it is. Don't use a romanticized term, healers, you know? And no Suquamish person is ever going to refer to a Navajo guy as Dene, unless their Navajo friend insists on being called Dene. But then, even then, be consistent. Don't be in an operating room with Karasik and call yourself Navajo. And it's just like, I don't know. I get it. That's next level knowledge of native relations, but it'd be weird for me to be just flip flop, because people would call me on it. Like, are you Navajo? Like, which one are you? I don't know. Other Navajos might feel different, but that just felt weird for me. And Marianne's character just felt like virtue signaling for the show. You know, look how much we know about Native Americans. Aren't we a good show? Aren't we woke? You know? And Grey's Anatomy does this, but just some of their best episodes have come from maintaining like what's happening in current events, but just donate some money to natives instead. Go find a cause. Chij for Che. Go donate to that. MMIW. Go donate to that. Keep us out of your plot lines. This felt performative. Look what these people are doing for Indians. Gives non-natives a chance. Frankly, this episode, all it did was gives non-natives a chance to hold their hands over their hearts and say, "Oh, look at those poor people look at those poor people and the stuff they go through in COVID, and they still fight today." And they can also put their hand over their heart and say, "Oh gosh, these people are so beautiful." Come on, Shonda. It's just like, they cram everything you can into one episode. And it's good. If you try to cram everything into one episode, it's going to be messy, naturally. And that's why Res Dogs and Rutherford Falls is so awesome, because they didn't cram it. It was the focus of the show. They gave everybody depth. They explained things. They didn't feel like, oh, this is our one opportunity. We got to cram as much as we possibly can because this is our only shot. That's what this episode felt like. Even if you cast Native people for Native roles, it was obvious that Native writers weren't at the helm of this, and it was obvious that we weren't running things. It's obvious. Like, it's just, I don't know. But what I hope that this show does is people can look at this and now can say, this is not acceptable. This is subpar. You can do better because we've seen better. And like I said with Res Dogs, it didn't set the bar. Like, that's the foundation, hopefully. It's just like, no, this is not good. You know, because Res Dogs shouldn't be the pinnacle. That should be the new standard. Same with Rutherford Falls. You know, like Resident Alien. Shit, even Dexter New Blood is much better than this. And I'm going to do an episode on that. And hopefully maybe I can get the guy Caleb Abrams on, who is the cultural Seneca advisor for the show. Like, the 5 episodes I've seen, they're freaking great. Like, the Native representation, it's so subtle. It's not addressed. It's not on the nose. Like, it's not like, oh, we got to put a feather in this guy's hair to make sure that people know he's Native. Or we got to put a, beaded hat on him or a Pendleton jacket so everyone knows. It's like, no. So, I don't know. You know what's interesting, though? 5 years ago, I would have probably liked this episode. And it's good that I don't like it now because, honestly, maybe even a year ago, I would have liked this. But Res Dogs came out. Rutherford Falls came out. And like I said, Dexter New Blood, like it just, in Resident Alien. When you see that now, you're like, oh, okay, that's what this should look like. And now you're just like, yeah, no. Everything else is, no, that's trash. So, I can't wait to do an episode on Dexter New Blood. If you're not a fan of Dexter, obviously skip that. And I still love Grey's Anatomy. I'm gonna wrap this up right now. Still love Grey's Anatomy. It's hard to not like this show, but this was a disappointment. And I feel like a part of it is because I hyped it up in my mind so much because I'm such a fan of this show, but this just didn't feel right. So I don't know. Everyone, let me know what you think about this episode if you've seen it. If you don't watch Grey's Anatomy at all, even just go watch this episode. The good thing about Grey's Anatomy, you can kind of just pick and choose. I mean, yeah, you'll be lost in some areas, but it's a lot like House, where it's just like, yeah, the plot lines are important, but it's like really the medicine, just the emergency of the day, the fire of the day is what is going to draw you in. Just check this episode out. It's on Hulu. Well, actually, it's on Netflix now. Grey's Anatomy, but season 15, episode 17. Just go watch it. It's like a 40-minute episode. If you know nothing about Grey's Anatomy, just go watch this and then let me know what you think. All right, everybody. Talk to you later.